Ambassador Scylla then stood at the center of the Galactic Council chamber, and did what she had done 17 times before in her long career. She prepared to mourn a species she had never met. The chamber was enormous. 1,000 seats rose in circles around her, filled with representatives from every known civilization in the Milky Way. Some were tall and thin, like glass. Some were short and covered in fur. Some floated in tanks of liquid. All of them wore the same expression: tired acceptance. This was routine. "The Vorthak Dominion has selected its next target," Ven said, her voice flat. She pressed a button and a hologram appeared above her. A small blue planet, spinning slowly, covered in water and green land. An uncontacted world in Sector 9 Omega. The inhabitants call it Earth. They are a young species. They have not yet achieved faster-than-light travel. A murmur passed through the chamber. Not of shock, not of sadness, just acknowledgement. The way someone might nod when told it would rain tomorrow. "I move to enter the formal mourning period for species 4217, known locally as humans," Ven continued. She kept her voice steady. She always did. Falling apart would not help anyone. No one objected. No one ever did. The Vorthak had ruled the galaxy through fear for over 10,000 years. They were massive creatures, twice the height of most species, covered in plates of black armor that grew from their own bodies like bone. Their blood was acid. Their claws could cut through starship metal. But their most terrifying feature was the hive mind. Every Vorthak drone was connected to an overmind, a single intelligence that controlled millions of bodies at once. They moved with perfect coordination, like the fingers of one giant hand. No species had ever defeated a Vorthak invasion. Not once, not in 10,000 years. The math was simple. The Vorthak came. You surrendered, or you died. Most species did both. Then returned to her seat and closed her eyes. Another world. Another funeral before the body was even cold. 12,000 light-years away, the human exploration vessel ISS Magellan drifted through the darkness beyond Neptune. Captain Elena Vasquez sat in the command chair, drinking her third cup of coffee that morning, and reading a report about a broken water recycler. The Magellan was humanity's first deep spaceship. It was held together with good engineering, stubborn optimism, and more duct tape than anyone wanted to admit. "Captain," said Dr. Idris Okafor from the communication station. He was the ship's xenobiologist, a tall man with kind eyes and a habit of getting excited about things that terrified everyone else. "I am picking up a signal. It is not natural. It is structured." Repeating. Vasquez put down her coffee. "From where?" "Everywhere. It is on frequencies we do not normally monitor. I think it is some kind of broadcast network." "Captain, I think this is alien communication." The bridge went quiet. Every person stopped what they were doing and stared at Okafor. It took him 4 hours to decode the signal. When he did, he read it aloud to the bridge crew, and the silence that followed was the heaviest Vasquez had ever heard. It was a death notice, addressed to the entire galaxy. It said that the species known as humans, located on the planet Earth, had been selected for harvest by the Vorthak Dominion. It said that all galactic civilizations should note that Sector 9 Omega would be temporarily restricted during the extinction event. It expressed formal condolences. It wished the humans a peaceful transition. For a long time, nobody spoke. Then, Lieutenant Torres, the navigator, let out a short laugh. "They wrote us an obituary," he said. "We are not even dead yet, and they wrote us an obituary." She looked around at her crew. 12 people, floating in a tin can at the edge of their solar system, reading their own species' death announcement, written by aliens they had never met. "Well," she said, "that is rude." She opened a channel to Earth. The message reached the United Nations within 6 hours. Within 12 hours, Every major government on Earth had been briefed. Within 24 hours, a plan that had existed only in theory was activated. They called it Protocol Prometheus. It had been created 10 years earlier, when deep space telescopes first detected structures around distant stars that could not be natural. Someone in a quiet office had asked the question that no one wanted to ask out loud. What if something out there was dangerous? What if it came here? Protocol Prometheus was the answer. A unified planetary defense plan. Every nation, every military, every resource. One purpose. The world did not panic. People were scared. Of course they were scared. But human beings had spent their entire history being scared. They were scared of storms, of predators, of each other, of the dark. Fear was not new to them. Fear was an old companion. They knew how to work with it, how to push it aside, how to use it as fuel. Factories that made cars began making weapons. Universities that studied physics began studying defense. Farmers stored food. Families held each other close, and then got to work. Earth went quiet. No broadcasts, no signals, no pleas for mercy sent out into the void. Just silence and preparation. Far above, in orbit around Earth's moon, the Vorthak Advance Fleet arrived. 200,000 drones, carried in the belly of a living ship that pulsed and breathed like a giant heart. They called it a tasting swarm. It was the first step in every invasion. Land, release terror chemicals, wait for surrender, begin feeding. Overmind Jarek Thule looked down at the blue planet through 1,000 eyes at once. He had consumed 43 species in his existence. He knew what the early stages of an invasion looked like. By now, the planet below should be drowning in distress signals, pleas for mercy, offers of surrender, prayers to whatever gods they believed in. But there was nothing, just silence. Jarek Thule reached out with his mind, stretching his awareness toward the planet, searching for the familiar taste of a species in terror. He found fear, yes, millions of minds bright with it. But underneath the fear he found something else, something hard and sharp and completely unfamiliar. It was not despair. It was not acceptance. It was not surrender. It was anger. The Overmind pulled his awareness back. He had no word for what he felt in that moment. In 10,000 years of conquest, no Overmind had ever needed a word for it. The feeling was small and cold, like a crack forming in thick ice. Humans, he thought, curious. He gave the order. The tasting swarm launched from the moon, 200,000 drones falling toward Earth like a black rain. Below them, 6 billion humans looked up. They did not run. They did not pray. They checked their weapons, kissed their families, and waited. The galaxy had written their obituary. The first Vorthak drones landed in 6 places at once. They came down in great black pods that hit the ground like fists, cracking roads and flattening trees. The pods opened and the drones poured out, 8 feet tall, covered in dark armor plates, their claws dripping with acid, their mouths full of teeth that never stopped growing. They released the terror pheromones immediately. Every Vorthak invasion began this way. The chemicals floated through the air, like invisible smoke, entering the lungs and brains of any living thing nearby. In every other species the Vorthak had encountered, the effect was the same. Total, paralyzing, absolute fear. Entire civilizations had fallen to their knees in minutes, unable to think, unable to move, unable to do anything except wait to die. The pheromones reached the human defenders. And the humans were afraid. There was no denying that. Soldiers gripped their weapons tighter. Hearts beat faster. Hands shook. Some felt like running, but not one of them ran. Because human beings had lived with fear every single day of their existence. They feared death, disease, loneliness, failure, the dark. They watched horror movies for fun. They jumped out of airplanes for sport. They had invented 100 ways to scare themselves, and then invented 100 ways to keep going anyway. Fear was not a wall for humans. It was a door they had learned to walk through. In a muddy field outside Warsaw, a sergeant wiped the sweat from his face, looked at the towering black shapes moving toward him, and said to his squad, "They are big. We have fought big things before. Open fire." And they did. The first wave hit resistance across the planet. In every landing zone, on every continent, the Vorthak-tasting swarm met organized, prepared, and furious human soldiers. Bullets tore into the gaps between armor plates. Explosions sent drones flying backward. Tanks rolled forward in lines, their guns barking without pause. The drones were strong. Their armor stopped most small weapons. Their acid blood burned anyone who got too close. They were fast, and they were coordinated, moving together like a single animal with 200,000 bodies. Hundreds of human soldiers died in the first hour. But something strange happened. Something that had never happened before on any world in recorded galactic history. The humans learned. Within 3 hours, field medics discovered that common baking soda neutralized Vorthak acid blood. Within 6 hours, soldiers were coating their gear in alkaline paste. Within 12 hours, factories were producing acid-resistant suits. A teenager in Brazil posted a video online showing the exact weak point in Vorthak neck armor where a sharp blade could slip through. It was viewed 200 million times in 1 hour. General Zhao Wei sat in the command bunker beneath the Swiss Alps and watched the battle reports come in on dozens of screens. He was a calm man who believed that panic was a luxury no commander could afford. He had studied every war humanity had ever fought, from ancient battles with swords and shields to modern conflicts with drones and missiles. He saw war as a problem to be solved, not a disaster to be survived. "They are weak to electromagnetic pulses," said one of his aides, reading a report from the Pacific Theater. "Short bursts disrupt their hive-mind connection. The drones freeze for 3 to 5 seconds. 3 seconds is enough," Zhao said. "Tell all units, EMP grenades before every assault. Hit them while they are blind." He gave another order that confused his staff. He told them to set up massive speakers at every defensive line and play loud, chaotic music. Anything with sharp, unpredictable sounds. "Why?" asked his aide. "Their sensory systems are tuned for the signals of their overmind," Zhao explained. "Noise pollution will make it harder for them to hear their master. Think of it as jamming a radio signal with static." It worked. In areas where the speakers blared, the Vorthak drones became sluggish and confused. They stumbled into walls. They attacked each other. Human soldiers advanced through the chaos, picking them off one by one. Far above the battle, in a cloaked observation satellite, a small alien woman sat alone in front of a recording device. Her name was Kes Torvani. She was a Selvari, a species that looked somewhat like a fox standing on 2 legs. She had been sent by the Galactic Council to document the extinction of humanity. It was a scientific assignment. Record the invasion, note how long the species lasted, file the report. She had expected to be done in a few days. Most species were. Now she sat with her mouth open, watching her instruments, and she could not believe what she was seeing. "They are counterattacking," she whispered to her recorder. "Not retreating, not surrendering, counterattacking. They have identified weaknesses in Vorthak physiology within hours. Hours. The Drellics spent 40 years studying the Vorthak before they fell. These humans did it in an afternoon." She zoomed her camera in on a burning city where human soldiers were pushing Vorthak drones back street by street. She saw a woman, not a soldier, just a woman in normal clothes, throwing a bottle filled with fire at a drone. The bottle shattered against the drone's face. The creature screamed and clawed at the flames. The woman picked up another bottle. "I do not understand this species," Kes said softly. 72 hours after the first landing, Overmind Zarak Thul reviewed the status of his tasting swarm. He had lost 40% of his drones. 40%. In a tasting swarm action, against a species that had not even left its own solar system. He stood in the command chamber of his hive carrier, a vast living room of flesh and bone that pulsed with the thoughts of millions. He had conquered worlds that had warships and energy shields and armies of millions. He had never lost 40% of a tasting swarm, not once. The feeling returned, that cold crack spreading through his certainty. He still did not have a word for it, but it was growing. Down on Earth, General Zhao allowed himself a small, tired smile. They had held. The first wave was broken, but he was not foolish enough to think it was over. The tasting swarm was just the beginning. The real force was still up there, waiting in the belly of that massive ship orbiting the moon. This was not victory. This was survival. And survival was only the first step. At the edge of the solar system, the ISS Magellan reached a Galactic Council relay station. It was an old automated outpost, designed to carry messages between stars. Captain Vasquez stood on the bridge and looked at her crew. 12 tired, scared, brave people. "Open a channel," she said. "All frequencies. Every language the translation software can handle." The channel opened. The signal went out into the galaxy, riding the relay network, spreading in every direction at the speed of light. "This is Captain Elena Vasquez, of the human vessel Magellan," she said. Her voice was steady and clear. "I am speaking to the Galactic Council and to anyone else who is listening. We received your morning notice for our species. We appreciate the thought, but we will not be needing it. We are not extinct. We are not surrendering, and we would like to talk." Vasquez out. She closed the channel and sat back in her chair. Across the galaxy, on 1,000 worlds, 1,000 species heard the message. Most of them did not know what to think. A species fighting the Vorthak was strange. A species surviving the Vorthak was impossible. A species sending a calm, almost casual message to the galaxy while fighting the Vorthak was something that had no name. But in the hearts of billions of beings who had lived under the shadow of the Vorthak for as long as anyone could remember, something small and fragile flickered to life. It felt a lot like hope. Captain Elena Vasquez had imagined many things in her life. Standing in a room full of aliens had not been one of them. The Galactic Council chamber on Verath Prime was the largest room she had ever seen. It stretched upward like a cathedral made of light. 1,000 alien faces looked down at her from their seats, and every single one of them was staring at her like she was a ghost, which in a way, she was. The galaxy had already declared her species dead. Ambassador Scylla Ven met her at the entrance. Ven was tall and thin, with silver skin and large dark eyes that seemed to hold a deep and permanent sadness. She walked Vasquez through the corridors of the council building, and as they walked, aliens of every shape and size stopped and stared. They are not used to seeing a living representative of a species marked for harvest, Ven explained. It has never happened before. First time for everything, Vasquez said. Ven took her to a private room and closed the door. She stood silently for a moment, studying Vasquez with those dark, tired eyes. "How?" she asked. It was the only word she said. Vasquez understood the question. "We have been fighting each other for 200,000 years, she said. "Wars over land, over food, over ideas, over things so small and stupid that we cannot even remember why we started. We are not proud of it, but it means we are very, very good at it. The Vorthak are just the newest enemy, and honestly, they are a lot simpler than some of the ones we have faced." Then sat down slowly. "You do not understand what the Vorthak are, what they represent. For 10,000 years, Every species that has encountered them has fallen. We have tried everything. Weapons, diplomacy, surrender, hiding. Nothing works. Maybe you were missing something, Vasquez said. What? Stubbornness. Ven was quiet for a long time. Then she said something that changed the course of the war. There is a weakness, she said, in the Vorthak biology. The armor plates on their bodies have connective tissue between them. It is softer than the rest. But more importantly, each swarm is controlled by a single overmind. If the overmind dies, the drones lose coordination. They become confused, slow, almost helpless. But no species has ever survived long enough to reach the overmind. They sit in the center of their hive carriers. They are the most protected beings in the galaxy. Vasquez smiled. It was not a happy smile. It was the smile of a woman who had just been given a target. Thank you, Ambassador. That is very helpful. While Vasquez was learning secrets on Verith Prime, Earth was burning. Overmind Zarek Thul had made his decision. The tasting swarm had failed, so he committed everything. The full swarm. Millions of warrior caste Vorthak, each one bigger and stronger and more heavily armored than the tasting drones. They fell on Earth like a wave of black water, and this time there was no holding them back at the beaches. Cities fell. Paris, Mumbai, Sao Paulo, Tokyo. The Vorthak poured through streets and buildings, killing and consuming everything in their path. Millions of humans died. The world screamed. But it did not break. Because something happened that the Vorthak had never encountered in 10,000 years of conquest. The civilians fought back. Not just soldiers, not just organized military forces, everyone. In a small town in Texas, a 70-year-old woman named Ruth set traps in her farmhouse using wire, kitchen knives, and a lifetime of practical knowledge. When 3 Vorthak drones broke through her door, 2 of them died in her hallway. But it was wounded so badly that it died in her garden before it could reach the road. In the streets of Lagos, teenagers threw bottles of fire and acid they had made in their school chemistry lab. In the mountains of Afghanistan, people who had spent decades fighting invaders of a different kind turned their experience against a new enemy. In the frozen towns of Siberia, hunters with old rifles used the snow and the cold and their knowledge of the land to ambush Vorthak patrols. The Vorthak were designed to fight armies. Their strategy for 10,000 years had been simple. Destroy the military, terrify the population, harvest the planet. They had no plan for a world where every single living person was a potential enemy. Where a farmer with a pitchfork was as dangerous as a soldier with a gun. Where children threw rocks and grandmothers set fires, and entire cities organized themselves into fighting units within hours. General Zhao watched the reports and felt both pride and grief in equal measure. Every story of resistance was also a story of death. His people were dying by the millions, but they were taking the enemy with them, and more importantly, they were buying time. He launched Operation Beehive. It was not a plan to win. Not yet. It was a plan to survive. Small, fast units attacked Vorthak forces and then disappeared. Tunnels, sewers, forests, mountains. Humans used every hiding place that planet offered. They struck from the shadows, caused damage, and vanished before the swarm could respond. It was exhausting. It was bloody. It was the kind of war that humans had been fighting for centuries, and the Vorthak had never seen anything like it. Back on Verith Prime, Dr. Idris Okafor worked without sleep. He had been given access to the Galactic Council's scientific archives, a library of knowledge that spanned thousands of years and thousands of species. With the help of alien scientists who were cautiously volunteering their expertise, he studied the Vorthak's biology in detail. The connective tissue between their armor plates was the weakness, just as Ven had said. But killing individual drones was not enough. There were millions of them. The key was the overmind. Okafor developed something new, a biological weapon, a molecule designed to attack the connective tissue and spread through the hive mind link itself. If it could be delivered directly to the overmind, it would cascade through every drone connected to that mind. Millions of Vorthak struck down at once. But there was a problem. The weapon had to be delivered to the overmind in person. And the overmind was sitting inside a hive carrier the size of a city, surrounded by millions of drones, in orbit above Earth. It was a suicide mission. Everyone who looked at the plan knew it. But there was no other way. While the scientists worked and the soldiers fought, Kes Torvani sat in her observation satellite and did something that broke every rule she had been given. She was supposed to be writing a scientific report, a dry, factual account of an extinction event. Instead, she opened a broadcast channel to the galaxy's public communication network and began to speak. "My name is Kes Torvani," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "I was sent to document the death of a species called humans. I am not doing that, because they are not dying. They are fighting. They are losing people every hour, every minute, and they are still fighting. I have watched a world burn, and I have watched its people refuse to stop. I have seen things that our histories say are impossible. I cannot stay silent about this." She broadcast her footage, the battles, the resistance, the human faces, dirty and bloody and tired and unbroken. She sent it out across the galaxy, to every world that had a receiver. On 100 planets, beings who had lived their entire lives under the shadow of the Vorthak watched a species they had never heard of do something they had never seen. Fight back and survive. The hope that had flickered in Part 2 now caught fire. It was small, it was fragile, but it was spreading, moving from world to world like a spark carried on the wind. And on Earth, in a burning city, a woman held her child close and watched the night sky, waiting for the next wave. She was afraid. She was tired. She was not finished. General Zhao Wei stood in front of a map of the Earth and allowed himself a moment of quiet satisfaction. Not because the war was going well. It was not. Millions were dead. Cities were ruins. The planet was bleeding from 1,000 wounds. But his plan was working. Operation Beehive had never been about winning on the ground. It had been about making the overmind angry, making it frustrated, making it commit more and more of its forces to crushing the resistance on the surface. And when you committed more forces, you needed tighter control. And when you needed tighter control, you moved your command center closer. The hive carrier had moved from its position near the moon to low Earth orbit. The massive living ship hung in the sky like a dark cloud, close enough that people could see it at night, a black shape blocking out the stars. Zarak Thul had brought himself within reach because he needed to be closer to his drones. And that was exactly where Zhao wanted him. Captain Vasquez returned from Verith Prime with two things. The first was Dr. Okafor's bioweapon, a small metal container no bigger than a water bottle, carrying enough engineered molecules to kill every Vorthak connected to the overmind. The second was a fleet. It was a tiny fleet, 3 ships from 3 species, the Telluri, the Selvari, and the Drenith. They were not warships. They were science vessels and cargo haulers, crewed by volunteers who had watched Kes Torvani's broadcasts and decided they could not sit and watch anymore. In military terms, they were nothing. In every other way, they were everything. "You came," Vasquez said to the Telluri captain when they met. "You fought," the captain replied. "For 10,000 years, we accepted that the Vorthak could not be beaten. You have been fighting them for weeks, and you have not accepted anything. We had to come. We had to see it for ourselves." The plan was simple in theory, and nearly impossible in practice. The combined fleet, along with human ships launched from Earth, would attack the hive carrier in orbit. They needed to punch a hole in its outer wall. Through that hole, a strike team would enter the ship, fight their way to the center, find the Overmind, and deliver the bioweapon directly into its body. The strike team was 12 people. Sergeant Priya Anand led them. Anand was a small woman with dark eyes and steady hands. She had spent her career in tunnel warfare, fighting in the tight, dark, terrifying spaces underground, where most soldiers refused to go. She was not loud. She did not give speeches. She simply looked at the mission, understood what it required, and said yes. Before the launch, she called her daughter on a satellite phone. Static filled the line. "Mama, are you coming home?" her daughter asked. Anand closed her eyes. "I'm going to try very hard," she said. "Be brave for me." "You be brave too, Mama." "I will." She ended the call and picked up her weapon. The assault began at dawn. Human submarines that had been fitted with stolen Vorthak technology launched from the oceans, rising on columns of blue fire into the sky. They were ugly, clumsy, impossible machines, built in weeks by engineers who had figured out alien technology through trial and error and sheer determination. Half of them did not work properly. The other half worked just well enough. They hit the Hive carrier alongside the 3 alien ships. The battle in orbit was short and vicious. Vorthak defense drones swarmed out to meet them. Ships exploded. Pilots died. But they kept coming, pouring fire into one section of the Hive carrier's outer wall, until the living armor cracked and split open like a wound. Anand's shuttle flew through the gap. Inside the Hive carrier, the world changed. The ship was alive. Its walls were made of flesh and bone. They breathed. They moved. The air was thick and hot and smelled of something old and rotten. Corridors twisted and shifted like the insides of a living creature. Lights pulsed in patterns that hurt the eyes. The strike team moved forward. They had maps based on what the Galactic Council knew about Hive carrier designs. But the maps were old, and the ship was alive, so nothing was exactly where it should be. The drones found them within minutes. They came from every direction, crawling out of the walls, dropping from the ceiling, rising from the floor. The team fought through them with guns, blades, fire, and desperation. The corridors were too narrow for the Vorthak to use their numbers, and Anand used this. She had spent her life fighting in tunnels. She knew how to use tight spaces. She knew how to turn a disadvantage into a killing ground. They lost their first member at the 3rd junction. A young corporal from Kenya, pulled into the wall by a tendril they did not see in time. They lost 2 more at the 5th junction, then another, and another. Acid dripped from the ceiling. The floor shifted under their feet. The walls squeezed tighter, trying to crush them. It was like being swallowed alive. 7 junctions in, with 6 of her 12 people dead, Anand felt something press against her mind. It was cold and vast and ancient. It was the Overmind, reaching out, trying to find her, trying to break her. Images flooded her brain. Worlds burning, species screaming, billions of lives consumed across 10,000 years. The Overmind showed her the full weight of its history. Every conquest, every extinction, every victory. It wanted her to understand how small she was, how meaningless, how nothing she did could change the outcome. Anand stumbled, her vision blurred. She felt the crushing despair of a mind that had watched civilizations die for longer than her species had existed. And then she thought of her daughter. She thought of a small voice on a bad phone line saying, "You be brave too, Mama." She thought of bedtime stories and messy breakfasts and little hands holding hers. She thought of every ordinary, beautiful, silly, precious moment that made life worth fighting for. The Overmind's pressure did not disappear, but she walked through it, the same way humans had always walked through fear, not by being unafraid, but by having something worth being afraid for. She kept moving. The Overmind chamber was at the center of the ship. It was a vast, open space, like the inside of a cathedral made of meat. And there in the center sat Zarak Thul. He was enormous, 3 times the size of a normal drone. His armor was thick and ancient, scarred from battles fought before humanity had invented writing. His eyes, dozens of them, glowed with a cold and alien intelligence. Around him, thousands of tendrils connected him to the ship, to the drones, to the swarm. He was the brain, the heart, the center of everything. Anand stood before him with 2 surviving teammates. She was bleeding from a cut on her head. Her left arm hung at a bad angle. She could barely stand. She held up the bioweapon. Zarak Thul looked at her. For the first time in his 10,000-year existence, he looked at a single individual from a prey species and truly saw them. Not as food, not as an obstacle. His voice came not from a mouth, but from the air itself, vibrating through the walls and floor. "What are you?" Anand pressed the trigger. The bioweapon fired directly into the connective tissue at the base of his neck. The engineered molecules entered his blood and found the hive mind link and began to spread. "We are humans," Anand said, "and you picked the wrong planet." Zarak Thul screamed. It was not a sound. It was a wave that passed through every Vorthak connected to his mind. Across the ship, across the sky, across the surface of the earth, millions of Vorthak drones staggered. They dropped their weapons. They clawed at their own heads. They fell. On battlefields around the world, human soldiers watched in disbelief as the enemy collapsed. In the ruins of cities, civilians stared as the monsters that had been hunting them crumbled to the ground and went still. In the heart of the hive carrier, Anand fell to her knees. The ship was dying around her. The walls were going soft. The lights were fading. She did not know if anyone would come for her. She did not know if she would see her daughter again. But she knew with absolute certainty that she had done what she came to do. She closed her eyes and let the silence hold her. The silence lasted 3 days. For 3 days after the Overmind died, the world was quiet. The guns stopped. The drones lay where they had fallen. Millions of black shapes scattered across the surface of the earth, like dead leaves after a storm. People walked through the ruins of their cities, and looked at the still bodies of the creatures that had tried to consume them, and did not know what to feel. Grief came first. It always did. The numbers were staggering. Millions dead, cities destroyed, entire regions of the planet scarred so badly that they would take generations to heal. Families searched for loved ones in the rubble. Children cried for parents who would not come home. The cost of survival was written in blood and ash on every continent. But underneath the grief, there was something else, something quiet and strong and impossible to kill. Against every prediction, against every calculation, against 10,000 years of galactic history that said they should be dust, they were alive. On the 4th day, rescue teams cut through the dying hull of the hive carrier, which had crashed into the Pacific Ocean when its living systems failed. They found Sergeant Priya Anand in a pocket of air near the center of the ship, unconscious, dehydrated, and broken in several places, but breathing. They carried her out into the sunlight and put her on a medical ship. Her 2 surviving teammates were found nearby. One had died from his wounds during the 3 days of silence. The other was alive, barely, holding onto a piece of the wall with one hand and a photograph of his family with the other. The galaxy watched. Kes Torvani had not stopped broadcasting. For the entire duration of the war, the Selvari xenoanthropologist had sent her footage and her words out into the stars. Billions of beings on hundreds of worlds had followed the story of Earth in real time. They had watched a species they had never heard of fight a war that everyone said was impossible to win. And now, they watched the aftermath. They watched humans dig through rubble with their bare hands to find survivors. They watched strangers carry wounded people through the streets. They watched soldiers sit down in the dirt and weep for their fallen friends, and then stand up and keep working. They watched a species mourn and rebuild at the same time, crying with one eye and planning with the other. It was the most extraordinary thing the galaxy had ever seen. Ambassador Scylla then stood before the Galactic Council chamber 1 month after the fall of the Overmind. The chamber was full. Every seat was taken. Representatives had come from worlds that had not sent delegates in centuries. The room hummed with a kind of energy that Ven had never felt in all her years of service. It was not fear. It was not resignation. It was excitement. Distinguished members of the council, Ven said, and her voice did not waver. I stand before you to formally introduce a new spacefaring civilization to the galactic community. They are called humans. They come from a world called Earth, and they have done something that none of us believed was possible. She paused and looked out at the 1,000 faces watching her. They survived. The chamber erupted, not in the polite, tired murmurs that Ven was used to. In applause, in cheering, in sounds of joy and disbelief and hope. Species that had been silent for millennia found their voices. Species that had accepted the Vorthak as an unchangeable force of nature suddenly saw a universe where things could be different. Captain Vasquez was asked to address the council. She stood at the center of the chamber, a small human woman in a worn uniform, and looked up at the vast crowd of alien faces. She was tired. She had not slept well in months. She had lost friends and crewmates, and she carried their names with her like stones in her pockets. She did not give a triumphant speech. That was not who she was. I am not going to stand here and tell you that humans are special, she said. I am not going to tell you that we are braver or stronger or smarter than anyone in this room. We are not. We are a messy, complicated, stubborn species that spends half its time arguing with itself. We have done terrible things to each other and to our own world. She paused. But when something comes for us, when something tries to take away everything we love, we do not stop. We do not know how to stop. It is not courage. It is not strategy. It is just the way we are built. We break and we keep going. We fall and we get up. We lose people we love, and we fight harder because of it. Her voice was steady, but her eyes were bright with tears she did not let fall. Millions of my people died to stop the Vorthak. I want the galaxy to remember them, not as heroes, not as warriors, as people, teachers and farmers and children and grandparents, ordinary people who decided that they would not let their world be taken from them. That is all we are, ordinary people who refuse to quit. She looked directly into the broadcast cameras, knowing that her words were reaching every corner of the galaxy. And if the Vorthak come again, for us or for any of you, they will learn the same lesson. There is no cost too high and no fight too hard when you are protecting your home. She stepped back. The chamber was silent for a moment. Then the applause began again, louder than before, and it did not stop for a long time. In the weeks that followed, something remarkable happened across the galaxy. On a dozen worlds under Vorthak control, species that had been subjugated for centuries began to resist. Small acts at first, refusals to pay tribute, secret meetings, whispered conversations about a blue planet on the edge of the galaxy where the impossible had happened. The Vorthak Empire was built on fear. It had stood for 10,000 years because every species believed it could not be defeated. Now that belief had a crack in it, and cracks, once started, have a way of spreading. Dr. Idris Okafor established the Prometheus Alliance, a coalition of species dedicated to mutual defense and scientific cooperation. Humanity stood at its center, not because they were the strongest, but because they had proven something that the galaxy needed to believe: that it was possible to fight, that it was possible to win. That fear was not the end of the story. Cass Torvani published her full account of the war. She had started it as a scientific document, and ended it as something between a history and a love letter. She called it The Species That Should Not Have Won. It became the most widely read text in galactic history. In her conclusion, she wrote, "I was sent to watch a species die. Instead, I watched a species teach the galaxy how to live." Sergeant Priya Anand woke up in a hospital in New Delhi 6 weeks after the crash. The room was white and quiet. Sunlight came through the window. Machines beat softly beside her bed. Her daughter was sitting in a chair next to her, asleep, her small hand resting on the edge of the mattress. Anand looked at her for a long time. She memorized the shape of her face, the way her hair fell across her forehead, the gentle rise and fall of her breathing. Anand reached out and touched her daughter's hand. The girl's eyes opened. "Mama," she said. "I am here," Anand whispered. "Did we win?" Anand smiled. It was the first real smile she had managed in months. "Yes, we won." Her daughter climbed onto the bed and curled up beside her, and Anand held her close and closed her eyes. For the first time since the war began, she slept without dreaming of fire. Far away, in the deep dark spaces between the stars, something ancient stirred. The supreme overmind, the intelligence that sat above all other overminds, the consciousness that had guided the Vorthak for 10,000 years, received the final transmission from Jarak Thul's dying mind. It was a memory, a single image, a small, bleeding, broken human woman standing in the heart of a hive carrier, smiling, holding a weapon no bigger than a bottle. The supreme overmind processed this image. It compared it to every other species it had consumed, every other civilization it had broken, every other world it had swallowed. None of them had smiled. For the first time in 10,000 years, the supreme overmind did not immediately order a new invasion. It did not send another swarm. It did not choose another target. Instead, it did something it had never done before. It hesitated. And on a small blue world, still scarred but unbroken, still grieving but unbowed, humanity looked up at the stars. Not with fear, not with anger, but with a quiet, steady promise. The galaxy had called them insignificant. The galaxy had written their obituary before they had even left their own world. The galaxy had measured them, judged them, and dismissed them. The galaxy was wrong, and somewhere, in the ruins of a city being rebuilt, a child looked up at the night sky and asked her mother, "Are there more of them out there?" Her mother looked up too. She thought about it for a moment. "But now they know we are here too." The child smiled. Above them, the stars burned on, ancient and patient, waiting to see what this strange, stubborn, impossible species would do next.